Italians offer me their one girl. If I did this with humans, the stars had always been Orion's escape, a constant reminder of how small his problems were in the grand scheme of the universe. But tonight, those stars felt closer than ever, as though they were watching him, waiting for a decision he wasn't ready to make. The alien's offer echoed in his mind, each word reverberating like a drumbeat. He stood frozen, his feet rooted to the ground, staring at the two beings before him. Their presence was both unsettling and magnetic. They waited patiently, their elongated fingers clasped in front of them, their shimmering eyes locked onto him. He realized they were giving him time to process, though their expressions betrayed no impatience. "Why me?" Orion finally asked, his voice barely more than a whisper. The taller alien tilted its head slightly, as though surprised by the question. "You are not extraordinary by your world standards, but you are ideal for ours. Your life, while solitary, reflects the essence of what humanity is: resilience, curiosity, and an unyielding capacity for connection." Orion let out a shaky breath. "I'm just a mechanic. I fix engines, not planets." The shorter alien's voice was softer, almost soothing. "You underestimate yourself. The task we propose does not require technical skills. It requires your humanity." Orion's mind raced. He wanted to laugh, to dismiss the entire encounter as some elaborate hallucination, but the shimmering craft behind them and the cool hum of its energy made denial impossible. "And this girl? What's her role in all of this?" The taller alien stepped closer, and Orion felt a faint pulse in the air, as if the being's presence carried a subtle energy. "She is your reward, but she is also your partner in what lies ahead. She will help you understand our ways, just as you will help her understand yours." The image of the alien girl lingered in his mind. She had been beautiful in an otherworldly way, her features delicate, yet strong. There was a softness in her eyes that contradicted the sharp lines of her form. But could he trust this promise? Could he trust them? "What happens if I fail?" Orion asked, his voice firmer now, though his heart still hammered in his chest. "Failure is not an option," the taller alien replied, its voice cold and final. "But should you falter, humanity will face consequences beyond its comprehension." The words hung heavy in the air, and Orion felt a chill crawl down his spine. He looked up at the stars, seeking clarity in their endless expanse. Was this truly his choice, or was he being coerced into something far beyond his control? The shorter alien spoke again, its tone gentler. "Do not fear. You will not be alone in this. Accept, and you will have the guidance you need to succeed." Orion clenched his fists, the weight of the decision pressing down on him. He thought of his quiet life, the simplicity of his days spent repairing machines and avoiding unnecessary entanglements. This was the very opposite of that, a plunge into the unknown with stakes higher than he could comprehend. And yet there was a strange pull in his chest, a flicker of something he hadn't felt in years: purpose. "I don't trust you," he said finally, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside him. "But I'll do it, not for your reward, not for her, but because if what you're saying is true, I can't sit by and let humanity suffer." The taller alien inclined its head, a gesture that seemed to convey approval. "Your answer is acceptable." Before Orion could react, the shorter alien stepped forward, its hand extending toward him. A faint glow emanated from its palm, and Orion felt a warm, tingling sensation spread through his body as the alien touched his forehead. Images flooded his mind, visions of the alien girl, of strange landscapes bathed in hues he couldn't name, of humanity rising and falling, their fates intertwined with the beings before him. When the glow faded, Orion stumbled back, his knees weak. What did you just do to me?" "We have given you a glimpse of what lies ahead," the taller alien explained. "The rest will unfold in time." Orion shook his head, trying to steady his breathing. "And when do I meet her?" The shorter alien's lips curved into what might have been a smile. "Soon." Without another word, the two beings turned and began to ascend the ramp leading into their craft. Orion watched as the sleek vessel shimmered and disappeared into the night sky, leaving him alone with 1,000 questions and a gnawing uncertainty about the path he had just chosen. The following days were a blur. Orion went about his usual routines, repairing engines, making small talk with customers, and spending his evenings gazing at the stars, but nothing felt the same. The encounter with the aliens had left an indelible mark on him, a constant hum of anticipation and unease that he couldn't shake. He found himself wondering about the girl they had shown him. Who was she? What did she think about being offered as a reward? Did she even have a choice in the matter? The thought unsettled him, but he pushed it aside. There was too much he didn't understand, and speculating would only drive him mad. One evening, as he sat on his porch nursing a cup of coffee, the air around him seemed to shift. A faint hum filled the night and a soft glow appeared in the distance. His heart leapt into his throat as he recognized the familiar light of the alien craft. The ship descended silently, and a section of its hull opened to reveal a single figure. She stepped out slowly, her movements graceful and deliberate. Orion's breath caught as he saw her up close for the first time. The alien girl was even more striking than the image he had been shown. Her skin shimmered faintly, as though it absorbed and reflected the light around her. Her eyes were deep and luminous, their color shifting between shades of blue and green. She wore a flowing garment that clung to her form, its material unlike anything Orion had ever seen. She approached him, her gaze steady and unreadable. When she spoke, her voice was soft but resonant, carrying an almost musical quality. "Orion." He stood, his coffee forgotten. "You're real." A faint smile touched her lips. "I am." They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of the encounter settling between them. "What's your name?" Orion asked, his voice hesitant. She tilted her head as though considering the question. "In your tongue, it would be difficult to pronounce, but you may call me Liara." "Liara," he repeated, the name unfamiliar yet oddly comforting. "Why did they send you to me?" "To fulfill the promise," she replied simply, "and to help you in the task ahead." Orion sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I still don't understand any of this. What am I supposed to do?" Liara stepped closer, her expression softening. "You will understand in time. For now, we must build trust. Without it, the path ahead will be impossible." Her words struck a chord in Orion. Trust. It was a simple concept, yet it felt like the hardest thing in the world to give. "All right," he said finally. "Let's start with that." Liara nodded, and for the first time Orion saw a glimmer of something in her eyes. Hope. As the night stretched on, the two of them sat on the porch, the silence between them gradually giving way to tentative conversation. Orion found himself drawn to her, not just by her otherworldly beauty, but by the quiet strength she exuded. And as they spoke, he realized that despite their vast differences, there was something undeniably human about her, a vulnerability that mirrored his own. For the first time in years, Orion felt the walls around his heart begin to crack. And though he didn't fully understand what lay ahead, he knew one thing for certain. His life would never be the same. The following morning dawned with an odd stillness in the air. Orion woke earlier than usual, his body restless despite the little sleep he'd managed to get. His mind was still grappling with the events of the previous night. He'd sat with Liara for hours, exchanging fragmented pieces of conversation, her presence both calming and unsettling. He glanced toward the porch where she had remained after their talk, sitting with her legs folded under her and her gaze fixed on the horizon. She hadn't slept, not in the way humans did. Her posture remained as composed as it had been when he left her hours ago. Orion stepped out onto the porch, the cool morning air brushing against his skin. "You didn't sleep," he said, half expecting her to confirm his observation. Liara turned her head toward him, her luminous eyes soft in the early light. "I don't require sleep as your kind does," she said. "Rest for me is reflective. I spent the night observing and understanding." "Observing what?" She gestured to the vast expanse around them. "This place, your world, you. I am learning." Orion leaned against the porch railing, sipping from his coffee mug. "What is it you're hoping to learn?" Her gaze met his, steady and unblinking. "What makes humans human?" He raised an eyebrow. "That's a broad question. Even we don't have it figured out." A faint smile tugged at her lips, though her expression remained distant. "Perhaps that is why you were chosen. You embody the questions we seek answers to." Orion huffed a laugh, though there was no humour in it. "I'm not sure if that's a compliment or an insult." "It is neither," Liara said simply. "It is truth." They fell into silence, the kind that was oddly comfortable despite the circumstances. Orion studied her out of the corner of his eye. Everything about her seemed carefully constructed, her movements fluid yet deliberate, her voice serene but firm. Yet there was an air of vulnerability beneath it all, as though she were as uncertain about her place here as he was about her presence in his life. "What happens next?" Orion asked, breaking the silence. Liara tilted her head slightly, as though considering his question. "Next, we prepare." "Prepare for what?" She hesitated for the first time, her gaze dropping to the ground. "The task you've been given is not a simple one. There will be resistance. From your people, perhaps even from yourself. You must be ready for that." Orion frowned. "You're being vague again. What exactly is this task?" Liara sighed, a sound that felt too human coming from her. "I cannot explain fully, not yet. But know this, your choices will shape the fate of your world." Orion's grip tightened around his mug. "No pressure then," he muttered. Liara's lips curved into a small, almost imperceptible smile. "You are stronger than you believe, Orion. You have faced hardship and endured. That is why you were chosen." He wanted to argue, to tell her she had the wrong person, but the conviction in her voice stopped him. Instead, he sighed and gestured toward the house. "Come on. If we're going to prepare, we might as well start with breakfast." Liara followed him inside, her movements graceful and precise. She watched him closely as he moved around the small kitchen, her head tilting slightly whenever he reached for something or adjusted the stove's heat. "You cook for yourself often?" she asked, her tone genuinely curious. "Yeah," Orion said, cracking eggs into a pan. "Living alone kind of forces you to learn. Besides, it's not like there's anyone else around to do it for me." Liara nodded slowly, her expression thoughtful. "In my culture, sustenance is provided communally. The concept of solitude is unfamiliar to us." Orion glanced at her, his curiosity piqued. "You don't spend time alone at all." "Rarely. We are a collective by nature. Individuality is not valued in the way it is here." He chuckled softly. "Well, around here people tend to cherish their alone time. Some of us anyway." Liara studied him for a moment, her gaze probing. "And you? Do you cherish it?" Orion hesitated, his hand stilling as he stirred the eggs. "I used to. Now, I'm not so sure." Her eyes lingered on him as though she were dissecting his words and the emotions behind them. But she said nothing more, allowing the silence to settle between them. After breakfast, they spent the day walking through Orion's small town. Liara was an enigma, her alien appearance somehow blending seamlessly with the quiet surroundings. No one seemed to notice the faint shimmer of her skin or the way her eyes shifted colours in the sunlight. Orion wondered if the aliens had some way of masking her more unusual traits, but he didn't ask. She seemed endlessly fascinated by the simplest things. The way children laughed and played in the park, the hum of conversation at the local diner, the rhythmic sounds of tools at the garage where Orion worked. "This world is vibrant," she said as they strolled down the main street. Orion raised an eyebrow. "Vibrant? You've seen this town, right? It's about as exciting as a snail race." Liara shook her head. "It is not the place itself, but the people, their energy, their emotions. They are loud." He laughed at that. "Yeah, humans are pretty good at being loud, especially when we're upset about something." She glanced at him, her expression serious. "That passion is what makes your kind unique. It is also what makes you dangerous." Orion stopped walking, turning to face her. "Dangerous? How?" "Your emotions drive you to great heights, but they also lead you to destruction. Love and hate, hope and despair. They are two sides of the same coin. If harnessed incorrectly, they could lead to the end of your kind." Her words sent a shiver down his spine. "And that's what you're worried about? That we'll destroy ourselves?" Liara nodded. "It is one of many concerns. Your species is at a crossroads, Orion. The choices you make now will determine your future." The weight of her words settled heavily on his shoulders. He wasn't sure what he had expected when he agreed to this strange arrangement, but it certainly wasn't this level of responsibility. By the time they returned to his house, the sun was beginning to set. Liara seemed content to sit on the porch again, her gaze fixed on the horizon, as though she could see something beyond what was visible to human eyes. Orion joined her, his thoughts a tangled mess of uncertainty and unease. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was in over his head, that he had been chosen for something far beyond his capabilities. As the first stars began to appear in the sky, Liara turned to him. "You are afraid," she said softly. He didn't deny it. "Yeah, I am." She reached out her hand, hovering just above his. "Fear is natural. It reminds you of what is at stake, but do not let it control you." Her words were meant to be reassuring, but they only deepened the knot in his stomach. "What if I can't do this?" Liara's eyes met his, their shifting colours reflecting the fading light. "You will, because you must." Orion sighed, leaning back against the porch railing. The stars above seemed to mock him with their indifference, their endless light a reminder of how insignificant he was in the grand scheme of things. And yet, as he sat there with Liara, her presence a strange mix of comfort and challenge, he felt the smallest flicker of hope. For the first time in years, he wasn't alone, and maybe, just maybe, that was enough to face whatever lay ahead. The next few days settled into an odd routine. Liara remained a quiet but constant presence in Orion's life, her observations blending seamlessly with moments of conversation and shared silence. Though she was an enigma in many ways, he began to notice subtle glimpses of her emotions. A faint smile when she saw something beautiful, a flicker of sadness when he spoke of his past. Still, the looming uncertainty of her purpose weighed heavily on him. Liara's vague statements about the task only added to his unease. He'd never considered himself particularly brave or noble, and the idea that he could somehow influence the fate of humanity felt absurd. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sun dip below the horizon, Orion finally voiced the question that had been gnawing at him. Why me? Liara, who had been watching the sky with her usual quiet intensity, turned her gaze to him. Her eyes reflected the orange glow of the setting sun, shifting like liquid amber. Why not you? He frowned. That's not an answer. She tilted her head slightly, considering his words. You are human, imperfect, uncertain, driven by emotion, but you also possess qualities that are rare. Compassion, resilience, the capacity to change. Orion scoffed. You don't know me well enough to say that. I know enough, she said firmly. I have seen your memories, your pain. I have felt the weight you carry every day, and yet you endure. Her words struck a chord deep within him, but he wasn't ready to admit it. Instead, he looked away, his gaze fixed on the darkening sky. I'm just a mechanic in a small town. I'm not some kind of hero. Liara's voice softened. A hero is not defined by their title or role. It is their choices that matter, and soon you will face a choice that will define you. Orion's stomach churned at the thought. He took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. You keep talking about this choice, but you won't tell me what it is. How am I supposed to prepare for something I don't even understand? Liara hesitated, her expression unreadable. Because if you knew, it might influence your decision. This is something you must face without prejudice or expectation. Her cryptic response only frustrated him further, but he knew pressing her wouldn't get him anywhere. Instead, he stood and stretched, his body tense from sitting too long. I'm going for a walk, he said abruptly. May I join you? Liara asked, her tone neutral, but her gaze searching. He hesitated for a moment before nodding. Sure, why not? The two of them set off down the dirt road that led away from the house, the cool night air brushing against their skin. The world around them was quiet, the only sounds the rustling of leaves and the occasional chirp of crickets. For a while they walked in silence, the rhythmic crunch of their footsteps on the gravel the only connection between them. But as they passed the edge of the forest, Liara spoke. This planet is remarkable, she said softly, so full of life and complexity. It is both fragile and resilient, much like its inhabitants. Orion glanced at her. You talk about Earth like it's some kind of marvel. Don't you have planets like this where you're from? Liara's expression grew distant. In some ways, yes, but our worlds lack the chaos of yours. Everything in my society is structured, controlled. We do not experience the extremes of emotion or unpredictability that you do. Sounds boring, Orion said with a smirk. She gave him a faint smile in return. Perhaps, but it is also safe. There is little conflict, little pain. Our existence is efficient. Efficient doesn't sound like living, Orion said, his tone more serious. Sometimes the chaos is what makes life worth it. Liara's gaze lingered on him, her eyes reflecting the faint moonlight. That is what we hope to understand, the beauty in your chaos, the strength in your vulnerability. Her words stirred something in him, though he wasn't sure what. They continued walking, the silence between them now filled with an unspoken understanding. Eventually, they reached a small clearing, the open space giving them a clear view of the stars above. Orion sat down on a fallen log, and Liara followed suit, her movements as graceful as ever. For a while, they simply stared at the sky, the vast expanse of stars, a reminder of how small they were in the grand scheme of things. Do you miss it? Orion asked suddenly. Liara turned to him, her expression curious. Miss what? Your home, your people. Her gaze grew distant again, her shoulders tensing slightly. In some ways, yes, but I also feel disconnected from them. Being here has changed me, though I do not fully understand how. Orion nodded, his own thoughts drifting to the family and friends he'd lost over the years. I get that. Sometimes, even when you're surrounded by people, you can still feel alone. Liara looked at him, her eyes filled with an emotion he couldn't quite place. Perhaps that is why you were chosen. You understand what it means to be on the edge of two worlds, belonging to neither? Her words hit him like a punch to the gut, the truth in them too raw to ignore. He looked away, his jaw tightening. Maybe, but that doesn't mean I'm ready to save the world, or whatever it is you think I'm supposed to do. You do not need to be ready, Liara said softly. You only need to try. The sincerity in her voice caught him off guard, and for a moment he found himself believing her. But the weight of her words also terrified him. After a long silence, he stood and dusted off his hands. We should head back. It's getting late. Liara nodded and rose to her feet, her movements as fluid as ever. Together, they made their way back to the house, the quiet night enveloping them once more. As they reached the porch, Liara paused, her gaze fixed on him. Orion, whatever happens, know that you are not alone. I will stand beside you, no matter the outcome. Her words were a comfort he didn't realize he needed, and he gave her a small, genuine smile. Thanks, Liara. That means a lot. She inclined her head, her expression softening. Good night, Orion. Good night, he replied, watching as she turned and disappeared into the house. For the first time in a long while, Orion felt a flicker of hope. He didn't know what lay ahead, but at least he wouldn't have to face it alone. As he sat on the porch, staring up at the stars, he couldn't shake the feeling that his life was about to change in ways he couldn't begin to imagine. And for the first time, he found himself wondering if maybe, just maybe, he was ready for it. The days that followed were a whirlwind of activity and emotion. Liara grew more forthcoming about the specifics of the task she had hinted at, though the details still carried an air of ambiguity. Orion learned that the alien faction she represented sought a form of alliance with Earth, not through diplomacy or war, but through a bond of trust. The task was more than a test of character. It was a symbolic act, one that would demonstrate humanity's willingness to adapt and collaborate, while also showing the aliens' commitment to coexistence. The stakes, Liara explained, were monumental. The future of both species hung in the balance. Orion struggled to process the magnitude of what she was asking of him. The idea of being the bridge between two civilizations seemed impossibly grand for someone whose life had been so small and quiet. And yet, Liara's faith in him never wavered. One evening, as they sat by the fire in his living room, she finally revealed the nature of the task. There is an object, Liara began, her voice steady but tinged with urgency. It lies deep within your world's core, a remnant of an ancient civilization that predates both your kind and mine. It is said to hold immense power, power that could either unite or destroy. Orion leaned forward, his brow furrowed. And you need me to… What? Retrieve it? She nodded. Retrieve it and decide its fate. We cannot access it ourselves. The object is attuned to human energy. It responds only to your species' unique essence. Orion's stomach churned. You're asking me to take on something that could destroy the world. I am asking you to choose, Liara corrected gently, to determine whether this power should be preserved, shared, or destroyed. The decision must come from a place of wisdom and heart, qualities you possess. He sank back into his chair, running a hand through his hair. That's a lot to put on one person. Liara's gaze softened. I know it is unfair, but I also know you are capable. The firelight flickered between them, casting shadows that danced across the room. Orion felt the weight of her words pressing down on him, but alongside it was a spark of resolve. I'll do it, he said finally, his voice firm despite the fear gnawing at him. Not because I think I'm the right person, but because someone has to, and you believe in me. Liara's expression brightened, her lips curving into a rare smile. Thank you, Orion. You may be the hope we have been searching for. The descent. The journey to the core was unlike anything Orion could have imagined. Liara guided him to a hidden facility on the outskirts of town, where an advanced alien craft awaited. The technology was beyond his comprehension, sleek and organic in design, glowing with a soft, pulsating light that seemed to respond to Liara's touch. As they descended into the Earth's crust, the air grew warmer, the pressure more intense. The craft shielded them from the physical strain, but Orion could feel the weight of the planet around them, a hum of energy that resonated deep in his bones. When they reached the chamber that housed the object, he was struck by its sheer otherworldliness. The artifact hovered in the center of a vast cavern, a crystalline structure that seemed to pulse with life. Its glow shifted through a spectrum of colors, each one evoking a different emotion: calm, awe, fear, joy. Liara hung back, her expression one of quiet reverence. "This is where I cannot follow. The artifact will only respond to you." Orion swallowed hard, his palms slick with sweat. He approached the artifact slowly, his heart pounding with each step. As he drew near, he felt a pull, as if the object were reaching out to him. When he touched it, the world dissolved into light. The choice. In the brilliance, Orion found himself standing in a void, the artifact now floating before him. It spoke, not in words, but in feelings and images. He saw glimpses of the past, of civilizations rising and falling, their fates tied to the artifact's power. It offered him a choice: to wield the power and reshape the world, bending it to his will; to share the power, forging a fragile alliance between humans and aliens; to destroy the artifact, ensuring its power could never be used, but at the cost of its potential to heal and unite. Each option carried its own risks and rewards, its own moral weight. Orion felt the enormity of the decision pressing down on him, the weight of countless lives hanging in the balance. He thought of Liara and her quiet determination, of the humans who lived their lives in chaos but found beauty in it, of the aliens who sought to understand and coexist. Taking a deep breath, he made his choice. The aftermath. When the light faded, Orion found himself back in the cavern, the artifact dim and lifeless in his hands. Liara rushed to his side, her eyes wide with concern. "What happened?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I chose," he said simply, his voice steady. She studied him for a moment before nodding. "And what now?" "Now." Orion looked at the artifact, then back at her. "Now we build something better. Together. A new beginning." In the weeks that followed, the artifact's power began to transform the world, not through domination or destruction, but through unity. Orion's choice had set in motion a series of events that brought humans and aliens closer together. Their shared efforts created advancements in technology, medicine, and understanding. Liara remained by his side, their bond deepening with each passing day. She taught him about her people, and he shared the intricacies of human emotion and culture. One evening, as they stood on the porch of his house, watching the stars, Liara turned to him. "You have changed everything, Orion, not just for my people or yours, but for me." He smiled, his hand brushing against hers. "You changed me too, Liara, for the better." As the night stretched on, they sat together in comfortable silence, the future stretching out before them like the endless sky, a future filled with hope, possibility, and the promise of a better world. And for the first time in his life, Orion felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be.